Good morning, afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another session of the Open Science First Fridays. This is a web series organized by the Open Science Group of the Global Young Academy. My name is Luisa, and together with Oscar and Stephanie, we are the co-leaders of the group, and I will be your moderator today. We are thrilled to have you with us for what promises to be a timely and thought-provoking conversation. We're really glad to have you with us. And just a few quick notes before we begin. Today's session will be recorded. It is already recording, and it will be shared publicly afterward, and as part of our efforts to make these conversations as accessible as possible. So, and one more logistical note, we will have a Q&A session after the presentation. So if you are welcome to either raise your hand during the discussion or type your questions directly into the chat at any point. And I'll bring them into the conversation once the talk concludes. So, let's move forward. So it's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Sidney Engelbrecht, a distinguished expert in research, ethics, and integrity. Sidney currently serves as the Senior Research Compliance Specialist at King Abdullah University of Science and Technology in Saudi Arabia. With over a decade of experience in research management, he has developed deep expertise in areas such as human and animal research ethics, biosafety, and bioethics. He has trained and advised research ethics committees across multiple institutions, including several universities in Southern Africa. And Sidney is also an accredited research integrity trainer with the Embassy of Good Science in the UK and holds professional recognition as a research management professional. Academically, he holds degrees in law, philosophy, applied ethics, and bioethics from Stellenbosch University, with additional training in compliance management from the University of Cape Town. So today he will be speaking on a topic that is increasingly relevant in the evolving research landscape, which is, do preprints pose new ethical challenges in the context of open access? So Sidney, we are honored to have you with us. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Good afternoon, all. Good afternoon, Louisa, and thank you for the kind introduction on this topic. As you rightfully point out, it's quite an important topic and involving topic over the last couple of years, focusing on whether preprints pose a new ethical challenge to open science. So good afternoon, all, and I will share this slide deck with you. So to give you an overview of what we will cover over the next hour or so, firstly looking at some basic definitions and terminology when we talk about open science and preprint, looking at what are the potential benefits of preprints, and then also finding a balance between the challenges, the cautions, and the pitfalls when using this particular open access platforms, what are the opportunities, and then in the final instance, some closing remarks. In terms of the definitions and terminology, we all know what preprints are, but typically it refers to non-peer-reviewed manuscripts. So the key concept there is manuscript that's made publicly available before formal review or peer review via the journal processes. So essentially, it's a manuscript that's open to the scientific community, and then that is done prior to a scientific peer review that occurred. Open access, then, it simply means it's the research output that's freely available. You might be aware with golden, green, brown, open access, and those are the types and formats of access that obviously ensure that the scientific community have access to research outputs or research communication, as it's also known. Licensing then typically here I will refer to the IP or the intellectual property ownership, but typically look at one basic example of the Creative Commons licenses that you can go on the website, download images, tables, and so on. Some of them are freely available. And again, the purpose of this talk is then exploring the ethical considerations in open access and the preprint society. The potential benefits, as you might be aware, obviously this enhances and enable a timely way in which the scientific communication can occur. So there's an accelerated or rapid dissemination where the findings are presented to the scientific community, as I've alluded to, without the peer review. So as we know, the peer review process, it's a timely process. So in the absence of that then, and with preprints, it becomes almost immediately available to the scientific community. However, establishing precedents, and we can see the help to establish precedents and credit in terms of innovation for early ideas within the research cycle. And the beauty of preprints, as you know, it allows for a wider community feedback. In other words, these documents, these manuscripts, the preprints are then open to the scientific community that enables feedback and potentially can improve the research quality before the formal peer review process occurs. It also promotes transparency and open science. So these preprints then support transparency, open science principles, making the data, not just the data, but the methods openly accessible to the scientific community. So essentially, it offers significant ethical benefits by promoting rapid knowledge sharing and collaboration within the scientific community. And for those of you that's been in the field of publication, would also appreciate how this potentially have helped with some cautions in the time of COVID-19. So when you have a global pandemic, to get these information out by means of preprints are then beneficial to the scientific community. Then looking at some of the challenges that it poses in terms of having these preprints available to the scientific community, obviously there are some ethical issues or considerations or challenges, as well as legal challenges, and then obviously there are some risks, potential risks, when promoting preprints to the scientific community. So firstly, then looking at what are the ethical challenges. The ethical challenge as we talk in research integrity, those 4 principles of the Singapore Statement that promotes honesty in all aspects of the research, professional courtesy, accountability, and good stewardship. Those 4 basic principles of research integrity as promoted by the Singapore Statement of 2010, is also relevant in the context of the publication of preprints. And so one of the ethical challenges then with preprints, allowing those to be available on a public platform to the scientific community, is this challenge of reliability and validity. Because as you know, typically a manuscript would undergo a peer review process once it is submitted to a journal. But obviously, while it is a benefit to the scientific community to have these rapidly available, as I've indicated, unfortunately, it lacks the formal peer review process, where during those processes, typically the experts or the scientific members of the scientific community raises certain concerns And so with one of the main ethical challenges that we see with preprint is this idea of reliability and the scientific validity of the findings. The findings are out there to the scientific community, but the question arises whether it is reliable information, whether it is valid because it might not have been tested. Then another ethical challenge is also the fact that it might not be reliable, it might not be valid. So it is then ultimately unverified findings. Why? Because it hasn't undergone a formal peer review process. So there is a risk, potential risk, in spreading unverified or even flawed scientific findings, particularly in the sensitive field such as health. And I've already alluded to the COVID-19 pandemic. It might undermine the peer review system. Again, the benefit of the preprint. It's published before the peer review, and so by having this document, this manuscript available to the community, that in itself undermines the traditional way in which a manuscript typically is scrutinized or reviewed in a anonymized peer review process that impacts the integrity of the journal. Nowadays, we've also seen where the names of the peer reviewers are published. So it's not just the anonymized peer review process that's being or potentially undermined. So they are varying in the acceptance, unequal acceptance of preprints across the journals and disciplines that complicate the establishment of the consistent ethical norms like publication ethics and authorship, best authorship practices. So just to emphasize then, what are the ethical challenges? Again, looking at the peer review system, anonymity. So preprints, as we know, they bypass the essential process of the traditional peer review that lead, as I've alluded to earlier, the quality, the validity, the trustworthiness of the research findings that's being published. And it also, unfortunately, then raises concerns around the rigor of the published findings. And so the public posting of manuscripts can potentially compromise the anonymity that's integral to many of the peer review processes. You would also may have seen that even some academic journals, particularly again in the field of sensitive fields to premature disclosure, may disallow the submission that have been previously posted as a preprint. So one needs to be careful, especially from a copyright intellectual property concern, that some journals might not accept a post-peer review public posting to allow for that submission to be published through the normal peer review process. And then there is the ongoing debate around the academic community on how best to balance the imperative of the rapid dissemination, again, taking the COVID-19 situation in consideration with the needs of the rigorous scientific evaluation. So the ongoing debate is essentially around, do we allow for these rapid publication or dissemination of the research finding versus the rigorous scientific evaluation through the peer review system? So obviously there are some impact on the peer review and the publication ethics, and I highlight four specific concerns there. Firstly, that journal policies may vary, as I alluded to. It might be that some journals would oppose to a preprint that has been published and then submitted for peer review, and whereas other journals might not even encourage that kind of behavior. So it is true then that some journals encourage preprints, while others may restrict them to a prior publication concern. We've also noted in the COPE, which is the Committee on Publication Ethics Guidelines, where it recommends screening of preprints for non-scholarly or harmful content before posting. So this is a recommendation that co-authors and researchers should consider when they decide or whether they want to determine whether or not to make a preprint available. So typically to ensure that there's no harmful content before it is posted. Then compromising the blind peer review system, as we know, the double-blind peer review system. So preprints, in essence, then it might compromise the double-blind peer review by the potential re-evaluating of author identity and reviewers. Sometimes, while the authors are known, typically you would find that the identity of the peer reviewers are not known, but in a double-blind system, both the co-authors and the reviewers are not known. And then in the emerging hybrid models, some peer review models combining with crowdsourcing as traditional review are emerging to address these challenges that's being posed by preprints, and then the impact that it might have in terms of publication ethics, access to the scientific community. Then some of the pitfalls that one could highlight, especially in terms of copyright, in terms of licensing. As we know, certain preprints may hold images, it may hold certain IP, intellectual property, and it's important that from a compliance and research integrity perspective, those legal issues are being considered. So open access. You might be familiar with the Creative Commons, where you go on the website, you can download for free certain images, and there are certain images that you need to pay for. But preprints typically use open licenses, typically like the Creative Commons, that allows for the broad reuse and sharing of those particular information or, for example, images. So copyright retention, also one of the pitfalls one needs to be mindful of, could be the posting of the preprint does not usually transfer copyright to the publishers, but it may affect the journal agreements. As you know, when you publish a manuscript that becomes a published paper, there's a transfer of copyright to the publishers. So one needs to be mindful of whichever platform you use as a preprint platform, that those transfers have not occurred. Also being mindful of the journal policy review in terms of, do they allow for preprint to be submitted and then reviewed via the traditional peer review system. So authors must carefully review the journal policies on preprint if it exists, to avoid the conflicts or prior publication issues. And then certain funders, one needs to be mindful of funders that increasingly accept this idea of preprints, especially in funding application, grants application, and obviously for career assessments that might influence the ethical norms. So what other cautions are there? I've alluded to the copyright, the potential conflicts. So just to emphasize that posting preprints, it may be in conflict with the journal copyright transfer agreement. So again, authors, co-authors need to navigate this quite carefully. So it's better to liaise with a journal that you have in mind for the publication, for the manuscript, to submit to see what their particular policy is around the peer review for a preprint or then a pre-publication. Yes, again, the journals have diverse policies, and as we see with artificial intelligence and generative AI or AI-assisted technologies, journal policies evolve as these tools evolve. So again, for the co-authors and the researchers to be mindful of those policies, but also for journals and publishers to ensure that they have policies in place regarding the acceptance of a manuscript that has previously made available as a preprint. And then in terms of the licensing implication, the legal implication, authors must fully understand and comprehend the implications that it might have in terms of the reuse rights, especially after posting a preprint. And then the issue around the prior publication status. So as we know, once it is published as a preprint, it's not a fully accepted publication as you would find in a journal. It still remains a manuscript until it is accepted by a journal. So while generally not considered a formal prior publication, policy vary impacting the future of publishing opportunities. Again, this is a decision that the co-author or the co-authors need to be mindful of. If you allow for a preprint of your research, that it may impact future publishing opportunities of that particular manuscript that is now publicly available on some sort of an archive or other platform. Then there are certain risks of misinformation and the public trust. Public trust is important, the public trust in science. And we have seen in the Ipsos 2022 survey, for example, where scientists have been deemed as one of the most trustworthy profession. So there is public trust in science, and preprints can be misinterpreted by the media and the public as validated science. And this leads, unfortunately, to the risk of misinformation and undermining public trust. And I think we all can resonate with this in the time of COVID-19. And there I say it then, that the COVID-19 pandemic highlighted the dangers of premature dissemination of unreviewed findings, leading to public confusion and distrust in the science and in the scientists. So education is paramount. It's important to ensure that our research community receive education about the preprint status and to maintain that trust in scientific communication. So while ethical oversights help with mitigating the risks, the potential risks, it cannot fully eliminate the potential harm. And it's always the harm, for example, when you do research in the medical field, there could also be potential harm to the scientific community in terms of the findings, the unvalidated findings. So one needs to be careful as the researchers, as the co-authors, to ensure that the preprint that we put out does not just meet the ethical oversight, and that we do not just mitigate the risks, but we focus on the potential harm that it might have on the research participants, whether it's humans or animals, and also on the scientific community at large. So then, research integrity, as we know, research integrity is about the trustworthiness of the research. Research integrity has to do with the manner in which the research findings are presented. So Stanek, for example, defines research integrity as the researcher behavior viewed from the perspective of policies, of professional standards and norms. So when we talk about research integrity, essentially it has to do with the integrity of the researcher, in this case, the integrity of the authors, the co-authors, the research team, and the potential for misinterpretation. So non-peer-reviewed preprints, then unfortunately it might carry inherent risk of propagating unverified or potentially incorrect scientific findings. And this may also resonate with you in the times that we live in with artificial intelligence, where there's always the caution. If you look at, for example, Elsevier's policy on the use of AI and AI-assisted technologies, it says there that the responsibility is on the co-authors, on the researchers, to ensure that the findings that are presented in a publication is accurate. Why? Because AI or certain AI tools have inherent biases, but also it might produce incorrect or unsubstantiated information. So again, the onus is on the authors, the co-authors, and the researchers to ensure that the information that's presented as their scientific findings are correct. So we need effective risk mitigation, including mandating clear disclaimers and even a visible watermark on all preprints where we can see as part of the scientific community that this particular document is a preprint, that this particular document has not been vetted or reviewed as part of the traditional peer review. And so there are certain cautions that we as a scientific community consider when we choose to use that document as a reference within our own research papers or manuscript. So there are growing calls for establishing international standards, and we can see that is happening where publishers are establishing, in journals are establishing standards and policies around preprint screening and potential certification to safeguard the research integrity. So then from the challenges that we have seen that's being posed by preprint, let's then look at the opportunity. What are the opportunities and how can we address these challenges, especially in the ever-evolving world of science communication? So the evolving ethical guidelines, and again, I refer to COPE, which is the Committee on Publication Ethics, and other bodies provide evolving ethical guidelines on preprint, open access, and that really is addressing the new challenges. For example, the use of artificial intelligence in scientific writing. Screening of protocols where preprints service, where the server itself implements a robust screening protocol for relevance of the subject matter, relevance of the manuscript that's being published, the ethics and potential harm to ensure that the content integrity is not being compromised. Then, in terms of non-profit infrastructure, there are increasing calls for non-profit, non-government, or government-supported preprint infrastructure to ensure the integrity and universal access. And this is an important point because universal access is what really promotes open access, where open access is available on our fingertips and not behind paywalls, where you would then unfortunately exclude a part of the scientific community given the high amounts of money that is being paid where publications are behind paywalls. And then funder recognition, where funders and institutions, universities, research institutions increasingly recognize preprints in the evaluation, in the promotion of ethical acceptance in the academic career, where it is acknowledged if you come up as faculty for promotion, that if you list a preprint in your curriculum vitae or your list of publications, that it's still acknowledged as your scientific contribution to the scientific community. So then in conclusion, a few points that I want to make, and that is then balancing innovation and integrity. The focus of my talk is looking at the ethics, but also the integrity of the process and the integrity of the researcher and then the co-authors. So preprints, as we know, it offers significant ethical advantages for open access because of its rapid knowledge sharing, fostering more collaborative research environments because it's part of the open access domain. However, they also introduce new ethical challenges, as you may have seen, around the quality assurance, around the peer review integrity, and the potential risks of misinformation. Again, I allude to the COVID-19 pandemic. However, ongoing community dialogue where the scientific community and policymakers come together, clear policy development and responsible practices are crucial for navigating this evolving landscape. And I would like to emphasize that the researchers, publishers, funders, other institutions like universities must collaborate to uphold ethical standards in this dynamic world of open science. And just as a disclaimer, as a good scholar, I want to emphasize that I used a AI tool to generate the slide deck, the template of the slide deck with images, which I have then updated the content. And with that, I thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Sidney, for your presentation. It was really, really thoughtful, and it it you pointed to some really important topics. I am open now for questions or comments. And Oscar, do you want to go first?
Yeah, hello. My internet has been a little bit finicky, so if you cannot understand me, please let me know, and I will try to write the question instead, or my comment. So I was surprised to thank you first for your presentation. It was very interesting and thought-provoking. And when you mentioned the challenges and you mentioned the opportunities, I was surprised to not see there like the one of the things we can do to try to tackle these problems in for these ethical problems is that some preprint services are already trying to implement a peer review process within the preprint service. So having and not having to like having the advantage of publishing before like like a big journal, and also having it be reviewed, and with the advantage of not limiting your research review to one or two or three reviewers. It's open for more. Like also some initiatives like the ones in for eLife, they have like a living paper that also is constantly being reviewed and is not limited to this kind of. So for my question, I would say are these ethical concerns really about the preprints themselves, or is it more
Oscar,
research?
I think you froze
Um,
when you start to do your question. We
yeah.
heard everything, but then when you start the question, it froze. So it was like, okay, so my question
Okay, I'll
is,
try just once more, and
froze.
if not, I'll just write it down.
Go ahead. I think we can hear you
Sorry.
again.
Yeah.
No, we can't. It froze. So maybe you can write in the chat.
Yeah.
I think he I think we lost him. Here we go. Okay.
Yeah. Back. So I'll just write it,
Okay, perfect.
and someone else can go before. I'll just do the
Yeah,
writing.
Martin, so go ahead and then we go back to Oscar. Martin?
Yeah. So I'm going to argue that peer review actually increases reliability and increases trust. I think we must not assume that peer review is a guarantee for reliability.
Absolutely.
Publication in a scholarly journal is not a seal for reliability, and we need to be far more critical in general about any claims in the scientific literature. The wide dissemination at an early stage to preprints, in my opinion, makes it actually easier to weed out flaws early. And the earlier they are weed out, the better. So if we specifically look at COVID, some of the greatest crap was not in preprints. You look at the claim from Didier Raoult, they were all research accepted in scientific journals. It was published there. The case of Andrew Wakefield on MMR and autism was published in the Lancet.
Yes.
Johannes Fiebiger in 1926 received a Nobel Prize on worms and cancer, which turned out to be completely wrong. And the Nobel Prize was never retracted.
Yes.
So there's a general problem of reliability trust in the peer-reviewed literature, because peer review really doesn't reliably work to really put a strong stamp of approval, and we need to be more critical. And we have to think
Absolutely.
about how we move down that line. I think preprints will only help, because also something that is really strongly related to trust is transparency. So the more transparent we actually make the whole process, and the closed peer review system, where all the criticism is just locked away, all the comments we can't see, and it's actually something I love about Wikipedia. Wikipedia has the talk page. So everything that is disputed on a Wikipedia page, that's out in the open. You can actually see what part of Wikipedia you might want to trust, and on what part there are diverging opinions. And this is all out in the open. I think for trust, this is a very important thing. Now, it's also important to keep in mind that in high energy physics and astronomy, preprints are the common practice for around 50 years. So even predating electronic preprints, they were exchanged. And it has been done that way. Actually, historically, in the 1960s, the National Institute of Health promoted preprints. They backed down due to the pressure from the journals. High-energy physics just went ahead, and the journals backed down from not accepting preprints. So we had a difference on how the community developed. And this is also interesting, I think, from the historical perspective, how to make preprints work. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Thank you, Martin. Thank you for giving us not just a historical overview of the preprints, but also focusing on the peer review system that we claim to be the be-all and the end-all, when in fact we have seen with artificial intelligence that it is not the case. We have seen with many peer-reviewed publications that's been published, accepted by a journal, has gone through a peer review system, and yet we can see in those publications the references to text from generative AI. So it does not guarantee that the peer review system, in fact, is better than allowing preprints to occur, because as we know with preprints, it's open to the whole scientific community, and you get more people that have access to the document, more people that can comment on the science that is presented, the scientific findings in the preprint, and those people are not anonymized. So as you say, it gives you open access to the document. You know who your peer reviewers are. They are not anonymized. They don't hide behind a peer review system. I think traditionally we are conditioned to believe that if a paper has gone through the peer review system, it is scientifically valid, or the findings are verified and then considered to be scientific valid. So yes, I also think that the peer review system it's not the rubber stamp for a preprint, whereas the preprint allows for multiple inputs, multiple feedback that the co-authors, the researchers can consider, incorporate, and then present a more solid, robust paper to a journal. So in essence, I completely agree with you. Any other comments or questions?
Yeah, we do have now the question from Oscar. I will read for you. So,
Thank you.
are the ethical concerns really about preprint themselves, or is it a symptom of deeper structural problems in how we evaluate and publish research? Using a publication model that was designed around the printing press in the era of digital information and AI, I believe has left researchers thinking preprints are the best option. We don't want to undermine peer review, but we are left without options for publishing. We urgently need a push from the scientific community into developing tools and models to publish in a way that we leave the paper behind, along with the reform in the evaluation system to try to solve this problem. Publishing in an open access model is just adding things pinned on top of the paper, just changing who's paying for the publication without fundamentally allowing us researchers follow open science principles fully.
Thank you, Louisa, for reading out Oscar's comments and questions. So the first question then about are the ethical concerns really about the preprint themselves? From a integrity perspective, in terms of those four principles that I alluded to, and as Marty also says, it's about the transparency. So the concern around preprints, the ethical concern is with the document as it is presented, because the idea is with the preprint, it might hold information that is incorrect, information that's not been verified. And so that is the ethical concern, that with the preprint, because it lacks the peer review by scientific experts, by the scientific community, that in itself pose an ethical concern. But how the institution, how the publishers evaluate this as an ethical concern, or as a system that adds to the body of knowledge, or as a system that adds to the global scientific community, then we can see that there is a value in the scientific, in producing that scientific findings. It is also about one's own evaluation of the scientific findings. Being an expert in the field, one needs to know whether something is AI generated versus something that's authentic, something that's been generated by human, rather than by an AI system. So the same argument is then in terms of the preprints, whether it has been verified. You can tell from the methods that they've used, the methodology, in terms of how the findings were generated, the interpretation. So it still requires those who want to use the research that's in the preprint to have also apply their mind, apply critical thinking. So the issue is then around the scientific findings within the particular preprint. It still requires critical thinking whether or not to use that information. But by and large, the beauty of preprints is to have open access to scientific findings rapidly, as I've indicated earlier. I hope that answers your question and comments. Marty, your hand is up.
Yeah, go ahead, Martin.
So something that we might want to think about is how to make peer review work in such a way that it really increases trust, that increases reliability. And, we have such a platform like PubPeer where people can comment. It would be quite useful if for every journal, like on Wikipedia, there would be a link, to some discussion platform. where all the thoughts on the paper from everyone who would like to leave a comment, where authors can come back to this. So which would be a kind of continuing peer review. And I think this would be a great help, because I see that one of the big problems is that there are things in the literature, and because it's published in a fancy journal, that people put a lot of trust into something that simply must not be trusted.
Yes, I mean the benefit and the beauty of having platforms like PubPeer available, it allows for the scientific community to even post-publication to scrutinize and comment on the research. And you'd see a lot of even so-called scientific investigators. Let's use Elizabeth Big as an example. She comments extensively on the papers, even on the topic of peer review manipulation. There are a number of publications where she had highlighted peer review manipulation that might have occurred, and you can then obviously follow the pattern there. So having platforms like PubPeer enables the scientific community to comment on papers that's been accepted by, whether it's a high impact journal, a Q1 journal or not. It still allows the scientific community, anybody essentially, to comment on those papers. And like you said in your earlier comment, even Nobel laureates, high impact journals, Lancet, Science, and so on, where papers in those particular journals have been retracted on the basis of research misconduct, fabrication, falsification, plagiarism, and so on, questionable research practices. So the fact that a paper is published in high impact journals does not warrant that there are no ethical issues around the content.
Martin?
I just wanted to give you quite an interesting example about peer review. So quite some time ago, there was a paper on extrasolar planets by the research group by Michel Mayor, who should eventually also get the Nobel Prize. And so they sent it out prior to submission to the journal to several colleagues to have a look at it. And there was something wrong. None of the experts spotted it. The person who actually spotted it was an amateur astronomer who commented on Wikipedia. He found a severe mistake in that paper about claims of habitability. And he said, oh, when you calculated the temperature, you actually forgot about the effects of the atmosphere. None of the experts spotted, an amateur astronomer on Wikipedia did it. And that really shows the power of continuing public review. I think that's a great example.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that example with us. I think it's like you say, it highlights the fact that even post-publication, there is still the opportunity to question and to comment on the research findings. And that we should not think because it is in a particular journal that the research itself is above suspicion. Thank you.
Oscar made a comment on chat, but Oscar, do you want to try?
I can try. Let me know if
I can hear you.
So I was saying, like, you were talking about PubPeer, and I do like PubPeer, but a problem I see with it is that now that there's a lot of different papers being produced, and it's unfeasible to actually read all of them. PubPeer relies on people actually reading the paper and realizing that there are concerns with it. So if it's never noticed, or if it's not viral enough, then there's usually no action taken about these concerns. So it's, in my opinion, still a systemic problem that comes with the publication system that we have. So I restate that I think it's urgent that we try to move away from very old publication system that allows us to not having to, even though preprints are very let us publish our research, is still letting us publish our polished research. It's not addressing a lot of different concerns for like positive bias, the reproducibility crisis, different things that come with the publication system itself. And I think some of the ethical concerns are because we are constrained by this kind of publication system. And we should be having more initiatives or discussions on trying to completely embracing the open science principles and allowing us to publish as we are generating the data and shifting from a researcher-led project research into a more community-led, like the community contributing to advancing science. I know that is not the system we have, it does not allow for it, but that's why it's very important that we start pushing for scientific policies that go towards that direction. Yeah, that's
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you, and that's why it's important to have databases and platforms like PubPeer, Retraction Watch, cross-reference or cross-ref, where you have these databases and tools available to actually see what's happening with these publications, what the concerns are. Adding to the issue, aside from open access, is the fact that even retracted papers are still being cited, and that in itself is also problematic. But I completely agree with you that we need to revisit and reevaluate the current system, the traditional system that we know, so that we can promote more open access. And I think with systems like PubPeer, it's a step in the right direction. Yeah.
Martin pointed out in the chat that you want to share, Martin? Want me to share?
Yeah, two points. One is, I mean, in general with peer review, that's a problem. Somebody has to do it. So the question is, how do we actually organize the community? And I like the idea that peer review does not need to be attached, to journals. Also, in that sense, I think it is far more helpful to think in the context of scholarly communication rather than publishing, because publishing has certain meanings attached to it. I find it quite odd that people consider something that is in a scholarly journal as published, whereas whether it's on a preprint service, it's not published. But despite the fact that it's wider publicly available on archives than it is in any scholarly journal.
Yeah.
And I also know that if we talk about citations, many people cite papers without having read them, actually.
Yes, so I think there is a mind shift happening where people refer to research communication or scientific communication, or as you put it, scholarly communication, rather than using publication or research output. So there's a slight mind shift happening where I've seen a lot of people nowadays refer to scholarly communication simply because it encompasses a lot of aspects rather than just a peer-reviewed paper that's been published in a journal. So I would also endorse this notion and idea of scholarly or research communication.
Well, do anyone else have any other comment or question I want to share before we move to the end. I think so. Oh yeah. Okay. So we're now at the end of our session. I would like to really thank you, Sidney, for your time and for sharing your expertise. And on behalf of the Open Science group of the Global Young Academy, and also thank you all to everyone who joined it today, and Martin and Oscar for providing some thoughtful comments afterwards and to promote this discussion. We will share the recording soon, and Sidney will follow up with the consent form, as I mentioned it earlier. And well, thank you. Until next time, stay connected through the GYA channels, and well, let's keep talking about open science and discussing those topics that are really important and really paramount to change the system that we have right now that is in need of a change. So, well, thank you all, and see you later.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.